Few years ago, a woman feeling stuck on a quiet road received an unexpected ride from a helpful stranger. 3 years later, she was stunned to learn that the man behind the wheel had been Elon Musk. One late night, Sophie was driving home when her car suddenly broke down on an empty stretch of road. The air was chilly and the darkness stretched around her, with only a few distant headlights passing by. When she checked her phone, there was no signal and her battery was almost dead. Anxious, she realized she might be alone for a while in the cold, stranded. As she considered her options, either walking back to the last gas station she'd seen or waiting for another car, a sleek, dark car pulled up beside her. The driver rolled down his window and asked if she needed help. He seemed friendly, a man in his 40s with a relaxed, casual style. Sophie hesitated but decided she didn't have much choice. When he offered her a ride, she accepted, feeling a mix of relief and nerves as she climbed into the passenger seat. As they drove off, she felt a bit uneasy riding with a stranger, but the driver's calm, easygoing attitude soon put her at ease. Dressed simply in a t-shirt and jeans, he didn't seem flashy or threatening. Even the car was plain, the type you'd rent at an airport. Nothing about him or his car seemed dangerous. He started chatting, asking her if she'd had a long night and what she did for a living. His voice was friendly but didn't pry too deeply. Soon, the conversation shifted to bigger topics. He began talking about the future, bold ideas about technology, and how it could reshape our world. His visions seemed like something out of a science fiction movie, yet he talked about them in a practical, down-to-earth way. Sophie found herself leaning in, genuinely fascinated. She thought he was just one of those rare, highly intelligent people who view the world differently. She didn't give it much more thought, just figured he was a nice guy with a big imagination. As they continued driving through the night, the conversation became even more engaging. They talked about space exploration and how humanity might one day live on other planets. He mentioned electric cars, artificial intelligence, and futuristic ideas that sounded almost unreal. Now and then he'd share his own thoughts, views so forward-thinking they seemed like glimpses of another world. Curious, Sophie finally asked, "So, are you a scientist or maybe an entrepreneur?" He just chuckled and brushed off her question as if it didn't matter, steering the conversation back to her. Sophie let it go, assuming he was just an interesting, brilliant person who dreamed big. After a while, they arrived in front of Sophie's building. She felt a mix of relief and gratitude, thanking the man for his kindness and remarking on how rare it was these days for strangers to stop and help. He just smiled and nodded, acting as if it was no big deal. Before she got out, he reached into his pocket and handed her a small, plain card. It had no company logo or title, just the name Elon with an email address neatly printed underneath. "Here," he said, "just in case you ever want to chat more about those ideas." Sophie glanced at the card for a moment, then tucked it into her bag. She thanked him one last time, and with a quick wave, he drove off into the night. As Sophie walked up to her door, she laughed a little to herself. It wasn't every day you got a ride from a stranger who spoke as if he had the future all figured out. She assumed he was just a quirky tech enthusiast with big dreams, but probably not the means to make them real. She stashed the card in a drawer, thinking of it as a quirky souvenir from a memorable night. In the months that followed, Sophie returned to her usual routine, busy with work, friends, and all the little parts of daily life. Occasionally, she remembered the strange encounter, but it felt like one of those stories you share with friends a few times and then let slip from memory. She never thought about emailing the man or reaching out. The card stayed tucked away in her drawer, slowly turning into one of those forgotten items you stumble across once in a while. She'd sometimes see news about a tech visionary named Elon Musk. His face looked vaguely familiar, but she never made the connection. The articles were all about rockets, electric cars, and futuristic projects that felt distant from her life. Sophie moved on, thinking of that night as a quirky memory and nothing more. She had no reason to believe it was significant or that her driver had been anyone notable. 3 years later, everything changed. Sophie was scrolling through her phone when a headline caught her eye. It was a video about Elon Musk, the same tech figure she'd seen in passing over the years. This time, the clip was an in-depth look at his work on space travel, electric cars, and artificial intelligence. Intrigued, she watched, curious about this person shaping the future. As the video played, something clicked. The face on the screen looked so familiar, though she couldn't place it right away. Then, like a flash of memory, she recalled that night 3 years earlier. The face, the name, the big ideas he'd hinted at. It hit her all at once. That Elon Musk had been the one who'd given her a ride. Sophie sat there, stunned, her heart racing. She replayed that evening in her mind, remembering his calm demeanour, the big dreams he'd hinted at, and the card he'd given her. She could hardly believe it. She'd unknowingly shared a ride with one of the world's most famous innovators. Sophie's reaction was instant. Her eyes widened as she froze, staring at the screen in utter disbelief. Her heart pounded, racing to make sense of the fact that Elon Musk, the Elon Musk known around the world, was the same man who had stopped to help her on that cold, dark night. It felt surreal. She began replaying their conversation in her mind, finally understanding just how much he had hinted at without ever revealing his identity. She remembered how he'd spoken about technology, space, and the future with a deep, personal passion. His words had been visionary, and now it all clicked. He wasn't just an enthusiastic tech fan. He was one of the most ambitious minds of the era, someone with the power and resources to actually make those visions a reality. She sat there, stunned, her mind swirling with a mix of awe and amazement. The realization left her breathless. She had unknowingly shared an evening with a man not only shaping the world, but also steering humanity into the future in ways she hadn't grasped back then. As she leaned back, her mind drifted back to that night, and she found herself combing through every detail with new eyes. She remembered his calm confidence, his carefully chosen words, and how he had simply laughed off her questions about his work. What once seemed like casual conversation now felt layered with meaning. He had spoken about the future as if it were a tangible thing, just waiting for someone to seize it. A wave of regret washed over her. She wished she had recognized him, not by his appearance perhaps, but by his unmistakable drive to push the boundaries of technology and humanity. She regretted not reaching out afterward, brushing off the email he'd given her as a simple gesture. She couldn't help but wonder how things might have been different if she'd stayed in touch. As she sat there reflecting, a profound respect for Elon Musk bloomed within her. She realized how humble and unassuming he had been, despite having every reason to act otherwise. Here was one of the world's most influential figures, a billionaire, a leader of groundbreaking projects, someone who could change humanity's fate. And yet he had stopped to help a stranger on a lonely road. He'd spoken to her kindly, as an equal, without a trace of ego, never hinting at who he really was. Now, she saw his humility as even more remarkable. That brief encounter had shifted Sophie's view of the world. She realized that kindness and generosity could come from anyone, regardless of their status or wealth. Thinking back on his actions, she understood how much that moment had inspired her own small acts of kindness over the years. His quiet generosity and genuine nature had stayed with her, reminding her to believe in the good in others, even when it felt hard to see. Elon's humility and warmth left a lasting mark on her, showing her that greatness could coexist with a deep sense of humanity. With her heart racing, Sophie rummaged through her drawer, searching for the card he'd given her 3 years ago. She almost couldn't believe she'd kept it, stashed among old receipts and expired coupons. But there it was, a small card with just the name Elon and an email address printed beneath. It felt surreal to hold it now, knowing what she did. Taking a deep breath, she sat down and typed a message on her phone, pausing for just a moment before hitting send. "Hi Elon. Not sure if you remember me, but 3 years ago, you gave me a ride when my car broke down one late night. I wanted to thank you again and to let you know that I only recently realized who you really are. That conversation we had meant a lot to me, even if I didn't fully understand it at the time." To her surprise, she received a reply later that day. The message was short but warm, thanking her for reaching out and suggesting they catch up over coffee. She reread it several times, hardly believing it was real. Could it truly be the same Elon Musk who dominated headlines and magazine covers? And did he really remember her? It seemed unlikely, yet here was the message, clear as day. The day of their meeting finally arrived, and Sophie got to the coffee shop early. She glanced around, trying to imagine what it would be like to talk to him now, with everything she knew. When he walked in, she recognized him instantly, and her nerves melted in a wave of unexpected familiarity. He looked just as he had that night, relaxed, a bit unassuming, with the same warm smile. He spotted her, walked over, and extended his hand. "Sophie, of course I remember," he greeted her warmly, shaking her hand. "It's good to see you again." They quickly settled into a comfortable rhythm, picking up as if no time had passed. Sophie felt surprisingly at ease. She recounted the events of that night, the nervousness of being stranded alone on a dark road, and the relief his kindness had brought her. She told him how she'd often thought back on that encounter, never imagining that her friendly stranger was actually Elon Musk. After a moment, Elon leaned forward with a thoughtful look. "You know, Sophie, I meet a lot of people, but some encounters stick with you. People who make a lasting impact are rare, and I don't say this often, but if you ever wanted to work at one of my companies, I think there'd be a place for you." Sophie felt a wave of disbelief and excitement wash over her. Here she was, sitting across from one of the world's most influential people, and he was offering her an opportunity she hadn't even dared to dream of. She could barely process his words, but more than anything, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Elon continued, "I look for people who believe that technology and kindness should go hand in hand. You told me that night stuck with you, and it did for me too. I want people on my team who see the bigger picture and genuinely care about the world, not just the bottom line." Sophie was taken aback, barely able to believe her good fortune. They talked further, delving into his projects, his vision for the future, and his views on humanity's role in a rapidly evolving world. She felt captivated, reminded of their first conversation, but now with a deeper understanding of who he was and the gravity behind his words. As they wrapped up, Elon handed her his personal number. "If you ever need anything or just want to talk, don't hesitate to reach out. And if you decide to join one of the teams, we'd be lucky to have you." They said their goodbyes, and Sophie left the coffee shop with a sense of both closure and a new beginning. She knew her life was about to change in ways she could hardly anticipate, all because of a stranger's kindness on a cold night and the unexpected bond that had brought them back together. Please leave your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.